today?
I was just going to say, the weather's fantastic.
Yes. Sun come up, I had to do the roof today.
Yeah, it's really nice. I wonder if the snow's going to stick around like this.
Nobody knows. Especially when I have 3 or 4 good days at the moment.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't live up here?
No, I don't.
Yeah, you take it easy on the road.
Thank you very much.
It's very important to watch that road, you know?
Yeah.
Because they do a little more up here.
They're restless. They're ready to get home.
Simon says, jump up and down.
Yeah, this has been tough on them. This is, I think, our 13th stop.
I really only have 2 seniors.
Simon says, help your sister.
He's my double.
So yesterday,
Help Ashley?
yes.
No? Wait,
Do more campaign tomorrow. And I said, yes, we have 3 stops. Then we get back to Las Vegas. That's exciting.
have your hands together.
When we've been speaking before, I've gone through my background and my family and so forth. Most of you know us really well, so I'll do this very quickly, so I don't bore the one we do. My wife Amy and I have been traveling in Nashville, our 3 youngest daughters. Lois is the oldest, Eva and Ashley. We have traveled around the state quite a bit over the past 3 years when I went to the Secretary of State's office 3 years ago. And they are now reacquainting themselves with those trips. And it was easier for them when they were younger. They don't like to be in the car much anymore, and they're giving me a hard time. And Lois thinks she's the boss now. This December 17th, my oldest son and youngest child shared that's my family. You know, for you that don't know my background, I was raised in Nevada since I was 11. My dad was a basketball coach at UNLV, and I had an opportunity to play for him in the early 80s. And I was very privileged to be a member of the first #1 ranked basketball team. During that time period, I really got excited about public service and the opportunities for oneself. They go in there with the right purpose and the right mind. My family was very close to Senator Laxalt. I followed his career very closely. In fact, I worked for a short period of time with him. And that gave me the inspiration.
I met him in Washington a few times, in Baltimore.
Just a wonderful man, isn't he? And you know, so that's why I went to law school, was to get into public service. Unfortunately, when I got out of law school, there were a number of issues that my family and I had to take care of, mostly with my dad, that stopped or delayed my progress into running for office. But in 2004, when I moved back to Las Vegas, I decided I was going to run for the state senate. And at that time, if you remember, Harry Reid was up for re-election, and every statewide candidate had decided not to run against him. So in March of that year, I was asked by the National Republican Senatorial Committee to go back to D.C. and visit with them and about possibly running against Reid. And I thought, even though I knew I wasn't ready to do so, I thought it was a great opportunity. My wife and I went back to Senator Allen. By the time we got back into town, 2 mutual friends had contacted me, mutual friends of my family and Reid's family, and they had contacted me and said Reid was so upset that I would think about running against him, that I made the biggest mistake of my life, that he was going to come after me and destroy me, my character and so forth. And as naive as I was at the time, I didn't think there was much he could do, and I wasn't too worried about it. But I ran for the state senate race, a district that was at 18.5% more Democrats. My wife and I walked door to door for 20 straight weeks, every day but Sundays, and 3 days we couldn't make it because it was raining too hard. We had a fundraiser one time. Anyways, we took the lead against the guy who was becoming incumbent. All of a sudden, the attack pieces saying I was involved in telemarketing fraud, the mailboxes, and put the undecided voters against me. I decided, you know, my father, most of my mother, more than my father, had always taught me that when you were unfairly targeted and something's wrong, you get tougher and you come back and fight harder, you come back away. So the easy thing to do was I could have walked away and got out of politics and not been involved in it, and disappeared for 10 years. But I decided I was going to sue the guy for defamation because what he said was not false. It was defamatory. It was past the point of political spin to an out-and-out lies. I tried to get the case heard before my next race in the Secretary of State, but it's, of course, related. We ran against the former governor's son, again, a big underdog, and my wife and I worked our tails off for the place in John, but they didn't know how much we were traveling through the state and campaigning. And coming in early voting, I was with it again, and being attacked pieces again. And again, these people that watch those TV ads, they believe those things. and I ended up losing that race. So anyway, we had a court case on that in July. I'll get to that. Hi, how's it going? Come on, David. Good, nice to see you. Hi, doing great. Thanks for coming by.
This is Robert and
Hi,
Doris Waller.
Robert, good to see you. Hi, nice to see you. Come on, why don't you sit down and, did you sign us in? Come forward.
Yes.
Pull up some chairs.
You want it?
Oh, how are you?
You know, she's delivers it.
Oh, she's gonna do delivery person today, huh?
There.
Gee, sit right here. Tell you what, I got the greatest workers now.
She's gonna keep following you.
They
I
fight
like
over
her
the-
newest volunteer.
She'll keep following you.
Oh, we'll just know. She did that.
Oh, I'm fine.
Okay.
I'll get the shirt.
He's right here. Okay, thank you.
I got back last Saturday. This is my first day out.
Basically, what I've done so far is just to give a background how I got into this race and my interest in running for public service. In a nutshell, basically, I ran for public office, and I didn't get into how this developed with Harry Reid. Well, in July of this past year, I had my lawsuit for the defamation case went to trial. And during the discovery process, we learned that all of these attack pieces were from opposition research that was created by Harry Reid's research guy, a guy named Cooper out of Reno. And the only witness against me at the trial was Harry Reid's own son, Lee Reid. So it all dawned on me what those initial threats that these mutual friends were telling me he was going to do. Well, anyways, I was told that you cannot win a defamation lawsuit as a public official, only be tried. Well, in July, I won the first defamation lawsuit. This is what I've been told in the state of Nevada by a public official. Not only did all 10 jurors find me innocent of the charges, they found me innocent of all 3 charges that they were making against me, and awarded me $150,000, which my attorneys took $135,000.
No wonder you won.
And you are? Yes.
Not much of a campaign contribution.
I'll tell you how smart I was. I was representing myself at the beginning, and I knew that wasn't the right move. I had a really good attorney. A guy named Gus Plank was from up here. Do you guys know that?
Yeah.
Gus Plank was the best attorney I've dealt with. And then, since you guys know Gus, I'll tell you what won that lawsuit, because it's almost impossible to win that thing. But the guy I ran against was really arrogant. And this thing wasn't even Mike Snyder, yeah. And this thing wasn't even the defamatory part, but Gus was asking Snyder in his deposition about taking 3 words or 4 words out of a sentence and putting it by itself in some other way and distorting what the true meaning was, and that was okay. So Mike said, sure, you get a chance, you can send out your own mail piece and respond to it. So Gus said, what if I asked you that I, Gus Plangus, what if I stated that I, Gus Plangus, like boys who play hard in basketball? Would that be fair for you to send out a mail piece saying that Gus Plangus says he likes boys? And if you can believe it, Snyder said, yes, you got a chance to respond with your own mail piece. And when that was read to the juror, they just said, oh. And at that point, I thought, we're going to have a good Snyder win.
Well, look what he did to Brian Perkins.
Yeah, it's Harry Reid and
I know.
the stuff. So what happened in August, I had won that lawsuit, and at that time, no one really knew if Reid was really vulnerable or not. I mean, it was an indication that there was some really strong feelings against him, but there wasn't any polls out at the time. So I decided I was going to run against him in the Senate seat. There wasn't a credible candidate that had put their name in the race. And I thought that I could handle his attack pieces after what I just won. And I felt that someone had to step in and replace him because of some reasons I'll get into in a minute. But it was really a crapshoot. I had no idea if it was going to work or not. In fact, I won the lawsuit on a Monday, and I was going to announce on a Sunday. But we got my dad out of the hospital on Thursday, and his birthday was Saturday, so I didn't want to tell anybody. I didn't want to give my dad a heart attack. And anyway, so it got leaked, the media leaked it out on the Saturday, and no one would speak to me, my family at the birthday. In fact, my mother didn't speak to me for a week, and after a week she called me over the house and she said, Danny, why would you do this without talking to me? There's no way you can beat me. He's too powerful, he's too strong. And these were before any of these polls came out. And I said, Mom, I hear that from everybody. I don't need to hear from you. You got to be supportive of them. Anyways, after a few weeks, he's told me now that all I got to do is win the primary and I'm going to be successful. And that's been the move. There's been 12 polls that have come out in this race, and I beat Reid in every single one of them, outside the margin of error. And I'm the only Republican candidate doing that. And the best of all is after Reed has ran full-blown TV ads for 3 months, spent over $2 million, his numbers have gotten worse and mine have gotten better. I'm beating them by 14 and 12% in the last 2 polls. And things are going very well. I got a tough Republican primary. There's the chairwoman that's running against me. When she got in the race, she was ahead. She led from the polls by 2%. The next poll had her beat me by 1%. The last one that came out a couple of weeks ago had me ahead by 2. Still close, but at least we're heading in the right direction. You know, all of us sitting here understand that we got some serious problems in our economy and in our country, and there's different ways you can solve them. I believe Harry Reid's way is the wrong way. And what American can't be scared of what's happening right now. We have a federal government that's taken taxpayer dollars, and they're saying, you know, we think Lehman Brothers is not big enough to fail, so we're not going to help you, but Merrill Lynch is, so we'll help you. So they start picking and choosing which company they want to succeed. Next thing you know, they start picking and choosing which industries they want to succeed. You know?
And that's just the socialist way of doing things. You do realize that, don't you?
Yeah, and that was going to be my next.
Okay.
The differences in philosophies, his government to take over the answers. And,
Yeah.
the next thing was, you know, they fixed the auto industry, which has a lot of union workers that they feel will vote for them. So they bailed out, take taxpayer dollars to do that, but ignore Nevada's main interests, our gaming industry, which is being decimated. Our construction industry is worse than that, and the small businesses are being destroyed. Basically, and then the same thing with the healthcare now. His answer is create more government programs. This gets into the socialistic approach you're saying. Reid's philosophy is if there is a problem, we need to get government involved and have government more involved in the answers, spend more government dollars, taxpayer dollars, and the government can find a better solution than what we can as individuals. And I believe that the success of our country is based upon the 2 main principles of our Constitution. And it's based upon individual liberties, but also individual responsibilities. You have a right to pick and choose what you want to do, but you have to take responsibilities for those actions and live by those consequences. Look what I'm a little blank on the word, precedent we have set with that first bailout. We told those big countries and those CEOs making hundreds of millions of dollars in bonuses, take all the risks you want, because if you're successful, you get the big paycheck. But if you're not successful, the government will come and bail you out. They've taken away the individual responsibility that's so vital to our country. And I believe the answer to these economic problems is to go back to the private sector and work for the private sector. We can create jobs through the private sector that will be longer lasting, more sustainable, and will actually expand as they go. Because if a private job works, is successful, you're going to hire, the person to hire is probably going to get a raise, you're going to hire another person to stay on. What happens when you have a government job? When a job ends, when the project ends, the job ends. Or you've got to pay for another job and take more government money. And it's all government funding everything. It never worked. It didn't work during the Great Depression. It won't work now. When I was in Hawthorne 3 days ago, we met with a guy. Well, there's 2, let me go back on the first. There's 2 things we can do immediately to help the small businesses. We need to lessen the tax burdens while they're having a hard time making a profit now. If we reduce the tax rates and we make it easier for them to succeed during these tough times. The second area, and I believe even more important area, is we need to lessen these ridiculous burdens and regulations that we're placing upon our businesses. 3 days ago in Hawthorne, I was at the gas station. A person saw my sign on my car and he came up to me and he said, "Are you running for the Senate?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You know, I got this mine, this ore mine, that iron ore mine. Is that right, Pete?" And he said, "Half of the iron is already on the surface. All we have to do is pick it up, and I can sell it to people right now. But I went and filed my permits with the BLM, and the BLM told them they're so backlogged, it'll take at least a year before they can look at it. And then once they'll take 7 years before it can become fully permanent and going forward."
Welcome to the BLM.
Excuse me?
I deal with them.
Well, I asked the guy how many jobs would your mine require, and he said you have to hire at least 300 people. We're here in a state that is dying for jobs, and we're handcuffing our businesses and not allowing them to prosper. In the San Joaquin Valley in Central California, the farmers can't get water, or the cattlemen can't get water to support their generation after generation businesses that their grandparents and parents had started because of the Delta smelt. That there's a concern that we're gonna lose some delta smelt, so we better not provide any water to the farmers. You know, my grandmother and my grandfather moved to San Joaquin Valley in the early 50s and had farmed there for over 50, 60 years now. So my grandfather passed away when he was 98. And what we're doing is we're taking away opportunities for these business people that have worked their whole lives to create a living for themselves and their family because of these regulations. There's no way we can compete in this international environment with these type of regulations.
I thought the smell was bait.
Nothing will eat them. Nothing.
Sometimes it is, you know.
You know, I can go on the different things there, but you know, what I believe in is, again, going back to the private sector, give the private sector some tax breaks, give a lesson of these regulations they have on them, unleash the entrepreneurial spirit of the American worker by getting government off their backs and out of their wallets, and you're going to see our economy turn around, a longer lasting, more sustainable economy. You know, for over 200 years now, the American workers have shown they're the greatest workers in the whole world if they were given the opportunity to succeed. But you can't expect them, our workers to succeed when they're playing under completely different rules from everybody else. So what I believe is there's a movement in Washington, D.C. now for a different philosophy of government. They're moving away from the socialistic, I'm talking about the movement around the country, not Washington. They want the movement around
here.
The movement around the country.
Keyboard is in here too.
Yeah. They want to get rid of these long-term partisan politicians, these party insiders that are tied to the base as opposed to the people they represent. And they want to go back and they're looking for, you've seen Scott Brown and you've seen with some of these other elections that have happened. Somebody's going to go back and represent the state first, the nation first, do what's right, irrespective of special interest groups or party allegiance. And I will do that. I'll run it and explain to people that's what I would bring about. I'm so fortunate to be elected. And so far, it's gone very well. I'm not going to have any money. Some of my opponents will have, but I know I'm on the right message. You know, I believe there's a few things that distinguish me from the main opponent, my main opponents, and I believe firmly in these. And I believe this movement feels the same way. One is I don't believe that I was against that first bailout. I would never voted for that first bailout. I think that the first bailout was worse than all the others because it created the next one and the next one. And that distinguishes myself from some of the other people running. The second thing is I think the biggest problem we have with our legislators is this federal pork that they're passing. We need to eliminate all federal pork. Now, some people in the Republican primary feel Harry Reid is not producing enough pork for the state. We've got to be in a pork race with all the other states and see if we can get more while the other states try to get more. And all that does is spiral the government spending out of control. There's a movement in the Senate right now. Senator Burr, Senator Corbin, Senator Eamon, these people, McCain is in this group, that they want to eliminate all federal pork. And I have told those senators, if I'm fortunate to be with one of their colleagues, I will stand firm with them, irrespective of the pressures you get from back home. Thirdly, I think we're way overtaxed. We need to cut our tax rates, and that's most Republicans feel that way. But I have some specific ways we can do that. Those are some things that distinguish me from the other people running. And I'm going to come up with some specific economic proposals that I think can help stimulate our economy, all market-based, without having government interference and without having to have government funding, just some common sense principles. The first one dealing with Yucca Mountain is, we spent $10, $20, $30 billion on that, right? And Harry Reid believes that one great thing he's done for the state of Nevada is he's closed it down. Well, I think you got to get creative with this situation. You know, nobody wants to have nuclear storage being a waste product for next to their state. But you know, there's a way you could use Yucca Mountain as a benefit for the people of the state. You turn it into a processing facility of nuclear spent fuel, like they do in France and other countries. You can create thousands and thousands of jobs, hundreds of millions of dollars in much needed state revenue, and you turn UNLV and Nevada into leading research institutions in the whole world. And there isn't a risk in this area because nuclear spent fuel is traveling on the highways every single day, and there hasn't been an accident over 30 years.
I feel something in one of my biggest complaints, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were a few amens before us, but people out there, they don't care what we think. And I hope that if you do get to be senator, which is probably my desire at this point, that maybe you might listen to the people that sent you there. Because you know what? That's my biggest complaint of anything wrong that's going on.
And I hear that. I hear that more meetings of all these places I've gone to. This is my 12th stop in the last 4 days. We have one more before we head back. Every single place I go, that's what I'm hearing from people. In fact, yesterday we were in Elko. We had 8 people that were independents or nonpartisans that changed their registration just so they can vote for me in the primary. But their biggest concern was that their representatives aren't listening to them, because the representatives are basically acting as politicians. And when you act as a politician, you act as a party person doing what's best for the party. See, I was raised, and my mother has been a public servant for 24 years, first on the school board, now in city council, that when you're elected to represent a group of people, you are a public servant. You're a servant for that public, and you need to represent their desires. And I will do that if I'm fortunate enough to go back and represent you. I understand what's important. All Laxalt, Senator Laxalt was a public servant. We've lost that with a lot of our representatives now, and it's created a lot of hostility. But with respect to creating new jobs, and then I'll take some questions in a minute, Nothing Mountain was one. I want to work with the other Western state senators and some other people that understand that the BLM should own all of our land here in our state. We should release that land. There's so much vital land that not only people in our state want to use for their enjoyment, which I hear a lot in the rural where the BLM is blocking them off from hiking, fishing, and hunting. But also there's a lot of BLM land owned in the state that would be great use to bring new businesses where we can diversify our economy. There's land that if businesses would leave in California, we said, hey, BLM, release this land. Bring the businesses in, you can use this land. It doesn't cost the BLM any money. Actually, it probably lose the state some money so they don't have to keep it up. It doesn't cost the state any money. We can bring in new businesses that will come in and create a tax base, a proper tax base for that land. We'll create new jobs for that land and create sales taxes from their business. And it would help stimulate and kickstart our economy. You know, those are just two simple, common sense proposals that again don't cost any more taxpayer dollars, and it doesn't have any more government involvement. The third area that's a little more complicated. I'll send it out to you guys so you can read it and have questions and get back to me. But those are the things that I believe with the economy. I believe those are the most important issues. That is the most important issue that's out there today. I'll touch real briefly on healthcare because that's been the one that people have talked about for a while, and then I'll take any questions you have. When I first got in this race, the healthcare issue was at the forefront of everything. It was in August, and that was when Harry Reid said, I'm not going to come back and meet with my constituents. They're all evil monsters, the ones that don't agree with me. So, he refused to meet with his constituents. So I said, I'm going to hold my own health care town hall. And it was really quite risky. I'd only been in the race about a week, 10 days. And Reid's campaign had sent out an email blast encouraging his supporters to come and try to embarrass me with their questions. But there's some common sense things that we can do in our healthcare system. It may not solve all the problems, but it would solve a lot of them. And it wouldn't cost the taxpayers any more money, and you wouldn't have any more government involvement. We could reduce our healthcare costs over 50% if you do 4 things. You allow people to purchase insurance across state lines to create more competition within the insurance industry. Every time in our country's history that we've created more competition, we've created better products at a lower cost. Currently in Nevada, 70% of all insurance is written by one company. We need to expand those opportunities. We do with life insurance and car insurance. We should do with health. The second area is talked about already a lot, which is the tort reform, where you cap the non-economic damages. Currently, there's between $180 to $210 billion a year that doctors spend in what they call defensive medicine. Defensive medicine doctors practice not because they necessarily feel the patient needs it, but they want to protect themselves from a lawsuit. But we need to eliminate that, and that would save the cost tremendously. The third area is to enforce the federal law that's already out there, which is that Medicare is to be the payee of last resort. 13% of all Medicare recipients have other insurance, private insurance, that receives premiums, but the federal government doesn't enforce those companies to pay the initial bill well enough, and just the government says, well, we'll pay it ourselves instead of that in the house. What's taxpayer dollars? They don't feel anybody cares about it. But it adds up to raises our premiums. The fourth area is if we would need to eliminate or substantially reduce these state mandates that are in insurance policies. State mandates are mandates that the state government tells you as a citizen you have to buy this coverage at this cost if you want to buy insurance in our state. contrary to everything our country is built upon. We in our country have the individual, individual liberty, pick and choose what you want, individual responsibility. You get to pick what products you want to buy based upon the cost and the benefit, and nobody tells you otherwise. Well, there's over 2,000 state mandates in the country. Nevada has one of the highest of any states, 56. You know what percentage of your insurance premiums are state mandates? 20 to 50% of what you pay insurance premiums are things the government tells you have to buy now with your children. In Nevada, it's closer to 50% because we have one of the highest state mandates. If we would just eliminate those, we're going to reduce our cost by over 50% without having to raise the government spending and get government involved. On the other hand, they're talking about these pre-existing conditions where people can't get insurance. A lot of this, not all of them, but a lot of it happens when people go from one job to another, they lose their job, and they got to get reinsured by another company. But why don't we get away from the employer-based insurance plan, where the employer provides insurance for the employee, and then when that employee leaves the company or transfers or loses their job, they don't have insurance. We should encourage employers to provide, to put the money they pay for the insurance into a health savings account for the individual employee. The individual employee can then pick and choose what insurance he or she wants, and they can keep that insurance with them from job to job. And if you're self-employed or unemployed, encourage those people to buy insurance for themselves. Right now, if you can believe that, if you buy insurance for yourself as a self-employed person, I talked to Laura about this, I think she understood, you don't get a tax deduction. But if you're an employer and you buy it for the employer, they get a tax deduction. Well, you're an employee for yourself, why don't you get the same tax deduction? It's one of the craziest IRS inequities, and no one discusses it. You know, if we would encourage individual ownership where you have this portable insurance, you'd have solved a lot of these pre-existing conditions. Again, I'm not going to tell you it's going to solve all of them. You could probably give me some examples that it doesn't fall under. But you know what? It doesn't have the cause and effect of Reed's plan is. Now, Reed's plan, on the other hand, he tells you how great it is. That if once the public understands it, they're all going to be in agreement with it. And if that's the case, then why is he doing these discussions behind closed doors? Refusing to put it on C-SPAN. If that's the case, then why is he having to bribe one senator after another just to get them to pass it? You know, what Reed's plan does is it's going to cost anywhere, if you believe the Democrats have $900 billion over 10 years, or the Republicans $2.4 trillion dollars. It's going to raise taxes $400 billion. It's going to cut Medicare $500 billion. It's going to create 72 new government agencies. And this is my favorite. It's going to tax you if you don't have insurance, but it's also going to tax you if you have too good insurance. They can't make up their mind how they want to tax you. They got to have something that you got to agree with their plan, or you're not going to be taxed. Now, if you're fortunate enough to be Reed or one of the other government employees or one of the union workers, you don't have to pay that Cadillac tax if you have too good of a plan. They exempted out government employees and union workers. I mean, isn't it amazing the deals that they made to get the deal passed? Now about our construction industry, which is decimated right now, and Harry Reid should understand, that was our third largest industry in the state behind mining and gaming. The tax bill, the employers are, according to their plan, would be fine if they didn't provide insurance for their employees, but they put a 50-employee limit on it. For whatever reason, we allowed an exception to going for construction workers to take them out of that, well, they would now get fined for 5 employees or more. Why would you want to hurt construction workers more?
It's called conflict of interest.
Special interest groups, where did the $25 billion is coming from?
About conflict of interest in Harry Reid was anonymous.
Right, I talked a lot, and I've tried to give you a background of my philosophy and beliefs of what I hope to accomplish. More importantly, what I wanted to do was travel around the state and listen to what your concerns are. I may not have all the answers to them. I'm sure there's going to be some issues that I haven't discussed or haven't been able to formulate a policy on. My dad used to amaze me because he was one of the greatest coaches of all time, but he'd go to these basketball clinics, and while all the other coaches, big coaches were out playing golf, he would be in the jacuzzi talking to a coach from Western Carolina or something, and picking his brain on you know what he did to be successful. My dad wouldn't agree with 90% of it, but he'd always find one or two things he did agree with and use them. You know, if us as representatives of the state don't get out and listen to everybody in all parts of the state and understand the concerns out there, we're never going to have the knowledge we need to represent you. So that's why we're here on this trip, and I'll hear what you have to say.
One question. Do you have a pickup truck?
No, I don't, but I'll tell you. This
You know what I asked you.
Yeah, of course. And you know what's great about it? If I rode in a pickup truck, you think people would say, this guy's great, and you need to vote for him. I'm gonna tell you,
Call
this
you
is true.
sensible.
First of all, I gotta tell you, Harry Reid has his camera here, so hi, Harry. And I gotta be careful, you know, they'll pick things apart and try to twist things around if you say anything wrong, so. But, not Pete, this guy, he's doing this to help me, so I can see how.
Counter anything that's said.
Yeah.
Record the question.
But the reason I say that is this, so I hope it doesn't get wrong. My campaign staff, I do have a truck, and we could drive around in it. The problem is it would not be able to seat all of the family, so we'd have to take 2 cars, and one of my family would have to ride with Pete and Andrew. And, you know, that's not me anyways. You know, my campaign staff says, you know, get the truck. And I'm a family van man. I got a Dodge Caravan family.
Well, you can say my name is Danny Tarkanian and I drive a van.
And you know what? That is me, and I believe it, and I can stick to my convictions with that. If you remember when we came to the events last 3 years ago, we had the same van. It's same Dodge Caravan out there. And that's what I ride.
All right, thank you. That's good.
But one of the things that I heard way months ago when people were first beginning to announce their candidacy was that we can't vote out Harry Reid because after all, he is the Speaker of the Senate. We need that prestige. I don't know what the heck anybody needs it for because all it's done is cost us. He's just about crushed this county. And since then, it seems like every time he opens his mouth, he digs that hole just a little bit deeper. And even, I don't know how many Democrats I know, even some back in Oklahoma have been emailing me, are you sure you can get rid of Harry Reid? Please get rid of Harry Reid. They're in Oklahoma, they're not affected as much as we are.
One of the things that I wanted to say, is going back to the pickup truck, Scott Brown got elected for a reason. The people of this country are tired, and I've seen it. I don't know how you're going to keep from doing this, Danny, because I have seen conservative after conservative, Democrat and Republican, go to Washington and totally change. They don't listen to their constituents. I know in a Supreme Court nominee case, I called the then state senator and said, you told me that your constituents were running 50 to 40% in favor of this Supreme Court judge. Well, I had to vote the way, well, it's just like you said, they go to party instead of what they believe. And I think that Scott Brown won, and I don't believe everything Scott Brown did. I am very pro-life, I'm not pro-choice. But he convinced all of these independents and Democrats, and you are going to, if you win this election, Harry Reid, it's going to be the Democrats and independents that vote you win. That's what you're going to need. And what you have to do is not be negative. And I know that's hard to do because you know Harry Reid is going to be negative. He already is. And you can't be negative. You have to listen to the people. And you have to have real solutions. I mean, he made a stand, and he didn't care whether he was going to win that election or not. And I'm wondering whether we can have somebody from Nevada like that. I certainly hope so. And I will tell you this, when I saw you interviewed on Fox News, and I saw Sue Rodman interviewed twice on Fox News. And the first thing out of her mouth was negative. And the first thing I said, I mean, and yours were facts. Yours were facts and ideas, and that really turned me off. And I think the people of the United States are sick of these powerful politicians who won't listen to them. They're sick of overspending. We have to balance our budget. We cannot do this thing. And the idea that you can tax America and not tax the unions and the government workers, is that just a tad bit unconstitutional?
Sure.
That you can pick and choose who you're going to tax and who you're not? And as far as business goes, entrepreneurship and business founded this. And the idea that you're going to have a freeze, which is a joke up in Washington, And the idea that, okay, we're gonna give you a $5,000 tax credit if you hire somebody. People that have small businesses and run small businesses, and people all over Nevada can't afford to hire somebody right now. What you can do is give them a holiday. You can give them a holiday for payroll
I'm
tax.
gonna get into, okay, you made so many points that I gotta get through them and forget them all. I wanted that last one very important, because that's my last, that was the one that I said was a little complicated on my economic plan, I'm gonna get to that. And I wanna tell you what I was saying. First of all, with respect to stop around and everything else, the one thing Scott did was really interesting. He talked about the truth pillars in his conviction, and he could say you can see this in him because he really believes it, I didn't believe it. And I think the more I get out and I'm talking to people, people come up to me and say, well, you know, I really know that you believe what you're talking about. I understand that there's true feelings there. There are other people that can talk and they say what you want to hear, and you're not going to hear that from me. There are going to be some things that people, that I'm going to say that people aren't going to agree with, like you said with Scott, the abortion issue. I had a young Republican that asked me the other day if I was in favor of Obama's plan for free education for all college kids. I said, no, I know it sounds great to you, it'd be great, but once you get it free, you're going to be paying the taxes for other people. For other people to get it free. Someone's got to pay for this. And I don't believe our government should be in that shit. And it turned him off. But these are things, certain things I believe with. And I'll give you some of the others. But the thing that I really believe in, that I think is kept in the country, and they understand this, and this goes into going negative or not. You know, there's really right now there's a two-party race, two-person race in this field. It could get more depending on whether Dakota gets it or not, and so forth. For myself and Sue Loud, and I've been asked, well, are you guys going to get negative with one another? And I've said, both Sue and myself have known each other for 25 years. We're not going to get negative where we attack each other personally, and I'm not going to. But at the same time, and I don't know which negative you're talking about, but at the same time, you have to distinguish yourself from what your opponent feels and believes in on a political basis, what your political philosophy is. See, I don't think, I'm firmly a believer that we need to eliminate all federal court. Sue has said on the record that she thinks Reed is not bringing enough pork in the state, and she's elected, she's going to bring in more. Now, is that considered negative in your eyes?
No, absolutely not. You're sticking to your
But
ideals.
I just got an email from a lady today who's very supportive of myself and my wife, probably more than me, but she sent an email and she said she was at the Lions Day, Lions Central Committee meeting, and people were upset because they said my campaign was attacking Sue. What we have done is we distinguish ourselves. I have a difference of opinion on pork liquor. I have a difference of opinion on the first bailout. Sue's quoted in the Nevada appeal as saying she could not say she would have voted no against the first bailout. And then later on she said there's a lot of good conservatives who voted for that first bailout. That's a difference. I think the first bailout was the worst thing we possibly could have done. Now I'm not saying Sue's position is wrong. If some people believe in that, that's fine. It's not a negative attack.
That's not negative. That's not what I'm talking about.
I know, I may not be you, but I want to bring this up because you're going to see this throughout the campaign. So when you hear Chuck Luke, who supports Sue, and some of these other people start saying Danny Tarkanian is negative, these are the things we're talking about. I distinguish myself on issues of policy, political philosophy when you go back to office. It will not get negative, but it will be on that. And when we talk about Harry Reid, it's going to be the same thing. You know, we're going to talk, Harry Reid believes in this socialistic type of agenda. Now, there are a lot of people in our country that may agree with that. I don't. And fortunately, I believe the vast majority of Adams don't, and we're going to beat them on that. Those aren't negative, those aren't personal attacks, and I promise you, we won't get personal.
The personal is what I can't stand.
Okay, well, when you hear people say this, I'm a little sensitive to this now, because I hear people, there's a movement, I believe, coming from Sue's camp that's saying, you know, Danny's trying to attack me to make me look like a bad guy. I'm only talking policy issues, and that's all I'll talk about. I want to talk about the economic thing. So you want me to answer the question or get to the...
No, I just wanted, well, in all honesty though, we've listened to pork for so long
Yeah.
that everybody thinks that's the only way a state can get any money out of the government. And that's not the way it's supposed to work. And I think if you took that from a positive angle, you understand where I'm coming from?
I'm all ready.
But I think you're going to have to. It's been since before Bush. I mean, even Bush was in the pork business.
Oh, Bush,
and so, and of course, he was another Republican. The thing I think that if you, just suggestion, put it in as a positive angle that this is how it's supposed to be done, not through the pork barrel program, I think you can pick up a lot of people that are sour. Because a lot of kids today with our socialist school system that we've got going, they don't even know what the Constitution's all about, let alone how it works.
Too many people associate the word free with good, and too often the government's free is backed by socialism.
There's nothing free because someone's got to pay for it.
That's my point.
And I probably haven't done a good enough job explaining that, the pork position here, as well as I've done in some other places. But see, to me, the pork issue is simple. If there's a state that wants a state project done, if the people in Florida feel it's necessary to have a bridge so the turtles can cross the road and not get hit by the trucks, which they do, which we're paying for.
Well, Harry wants to put a bridge across the highway here.
Well, then the people of Florida should pay for that. I mean, it's a state issue. It's not a federal government issue. The federal government has no business in any state projects. What they should do is stop taxing us as much, put the money back in the individual's pockets, and if the states want to build it, let the states raise that revenue to do that. See, my dad's philosophy was, when he coached basketball, he wanted to do one or two things and do them great. He said he loved to play against a team that did 5 or 6 things because they can't do anything very well. We have a federal government that was created, we have all of our governments were created to do a specific few things, and we should put all of our resources in those few things and do them great. We shouldn't be trying to solve all the social ills with government because we can't do anything well. And that's basically my philosophy from the top, and the pork is one thing with it. The third area of our economic plan is exactly what you're saying. I'm glad you said that because I've been working with some key policy people around the country, and we firmly believe the third area, that if we want to generate more jobs, we got to create more consumption. Because once you create more consumption, there's more product that is needed. So then you got to hire people to create the product. You create a real jobs creation program as opposed to this $5,000 credit that Obama wants to do, where he wants to encourage businesses to hire new employees, even if they could afford it. The businesses don't need them, so they're inefficient. What we want to do is we want to eliminate all the federal pork, and we want to take all the pork that's in that stimulus package that hasn't been spent in excess of $200 billion. And we want to put that into a fund where we would tell each state, if you reduce your sales taxes by upwards of 50%, we will provide the state funding for you, but we want people to be able to buy the product with the reduced sales tax. We pay lower prices and people might go back in and purchase those things. It's a consumption-based incentive as opposed to an artificial-based incentive. And that's our third approach.
You don't agree that that money, as it was originally outlined, should be returned and reduce the deficit as opposed to what you just said?
The deficit's the most important thing, and we could reduce it, but if you're going to stimulate the economy with these $5,000 tax rates, you're going to try to find a way to do it. We believe it should be done through the consumption side as opposed to the artificial side. Would I say don't take the money now, just reduce the debt, or try to encourage the consumption? The money's been allocated, is going to be spent by the Democrats on something. Right now, it's on pork projects I'd rather do in ours. If we could use that money and put it back in the deficit reduction, I would certainly do that.
Assuming that something's going to happen as opposed to that.
It's already been voted on and allocated, so you get that not used, you have to go back and get it voted on with the 9 senators right now. On their side, it's going to be allocated. Our deficit is the worst crisis we're facing more than jobs, and I agree with you. We have to reduce that, those costs, and I've come up with, or at least our proposals, how we can reduce the deficit in a number of areas, which we'll be sending out, and without getting long-winded, if you'll see. And part of it is eliminating some of these programs that the federal government shouldn't be involved in. Some of it is the pork barrels that are being spent through the average of 40-some billion that will be done this past few years is stopped and put back into reducing the deficit.
Well, I'm probably confusing that with the TARP funds. It's money that's being repaid by financial institutions that now is going to be reallocated and spent on the government programs.
It should be reallocated. I have to revote on that because that money's supposed to come back, and I certainly think that money has to go back to pay on the deficit. But there is over, I know the other pork part, there's over 400-some billion or 800-some billion of the stimulus money they haven't spent. Of the 400 billion, 200-some, 280, I don't have the correct number. And the 200-some billions is for these pork projects. That's the money I'm talking about. That's already been allocated instead of building pork projects, reducing sales taxes. Yes.
Our biggest problem in this country is our trade deficit, which is right now holding about $13 trillion. It's all in go, not enough out go.
Yeah.
I've been to the Rust Belts in Indiana, Ohio, Chicago. Factories are closing. A good example was in Maine. The little shoe company, Dexter, on the one bucket. He bought the company. He sold the company the next day and put 365 people out, moved it to China rather, because the owners pay less shoes. 365 people out of work in a little town in Maine.
Let me ask you something, because that's an issue that we hear from everybody. What would you do? What do you think the solution is?
Well, it's not, it's got to be equalized. They say fair trade, free trade. It's not free trade. I can buy a Grand Wagoneer in this country for maybe $35,000. They like them in lots of foreign countries, but they'll cost $110,000.
They talk about tariffs then.
Yeah, the most popular motorcycle in Russia is the Harley Davidson, but they're going to pay close to $100,000 for it there.
So you're saying the tariffs of our products
It's not fair.
are not, okay.
Never has been fair. Most of the politicians have the lobbyists in their pocket.
And all of them do it.
Remember that when you go Capitol Hill.
I haven't heard this.
Tariff in Russia is terrible. A pair of Levi's in this country right now is going to run you anywhere from $35 a pair.
And by the way, the Levi's are made in China.
They ship them into this country, ship it right back to Russia, $140 a pair. It's the tariff costs on top, and they're violent. It's not,
Well, that's a good point. Then, and also we have the regulations that no other countries are imposing upon us. You know, for us to build a nuclear power plant, it would take 10 years to get the permit to get one started. In China, they have it already set. They're going to build 72 nuclear power plants in 10 years. So if we keep trying to tie the hands of our businesses with the regulations, that's another thing.
but don't throw China at us, because during the Gulf Olympics that they just had, they had to close down 15 factories to get the air pollution down.
No, I'm not saying.
Yeah, Obama's been doing quite a bit of that.
And the other thing I want to mention in your statement, Jerry, is that we have tried very hard in our campaign to be solution-oriented and specific-oriented, how to solve these problems that are there. I'm not talking in generalities, because what do you hear from Obama? It was in the paper either yesterday or today, I can't remember where I saw it. The Republicans, again, as a party, no. Well, you know, here's a solution to the healthcare that I gave you. Here's a solution. Now, you may not agree with it, but I don't think his has worked too well himself. But in our, what you mentioned on that television interview I had at Fox News, they asked about the healthcare. Do you want to rattle off the foreign enrollment? And yeah, so what we're trying to do is be very specific oriented or resolution oriented.
Well, that's what I was trying to say when I was saying not so negative, because it actually turned me off when I heard Sue immediately start talking about Harry Reid. That's not what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear what she stood for and what she's going to do and what people are going to do to change, because this country has to change. It has to change.
And my interests are a little bit more self-centered, I guess, and kind of in the micro-universe. You were I'm the chief financial officer for the school district, and so education is key. It's part of my job, it's part of my life. I coach. I brought my kids here so that they can hear things as well. And over the course of my job, since I've been here, I've been in my job for 13 years, we have suffered some huge, devastating economic blows. Some of those were from our local economy. As you know, we're agriculture and mining based. And shortly after I got my job here as the finance officer, we suffered one of the worst economic devastation we had when our largest private business, which is a mining operation, closed about 6 months after I started here. We saw our property taxes reduced by 40%. Our population decreased by 20%, the population of the entire county. Our student population decreased by 25%. Our resources were basically half what they was before, and we're still supposed to operate a student body, offer equitable education compared with the rest of Nevada, and competitively global atmosphere now, not just in the United States atmosphere. So me and I've been involved in county politics locally, trying to figure out ways that we can develop and stabilize and diversify a small local economy in rural Nevada, and our economy is noted in many other areas. We're hanging by our fingertips sometimes, and we really need some sort of injection into our local communities that will help us get a little bit more strengthened hold on the services that we offer and be contributors to Nevada as well, because we need to pay our fair share and not always be on the take. We really need to be producing and providing in certain respects. And there was a time in our history in lifetime where that was the case. And the other thing, now that we've recovered a little bit on the local economy, we have a mining operation, but it's destined to close again. It's an inevitability. It's not something that is perpetual. So we need to hedge and prepare for another Flint, Michigan, or for another major closure of and see a mass exodus of friends and family and volunteers and people that make the local economy work. Now that we're able to recover economically from a local standpoint, we have we're suffering the largest economic loss in the state of Nevada's history. So we're staring at 22% to 30% cuts in education funding. And I have 2 children in school that are going to lose a year of services in education. And there's no do-overs in school. Once you pass your senior year of high school, you don't get to go back and get course offerings. You don't get to go back and get more money and retake advanced placement courses and those types of things. So I have an interest, an economic development interest, diversification interest, and stabilization interest with respect to an education funding. You might be aware that there are state mandates, there are federal mandates that dictate to us that we have to spend money. But there's not always funding appropriated that directly offsets the cost of those federal and state programs. And so we are continually having to take from our discretionary funds to pay regulations, pay for rules, pay for administrative inflation year after year after year that erodes the dollars that we have for our youth. And my motto has always been, as part of the song, children are our future, teach them well, let them lead the way. What's becoming increasingly more difficult is the fact that we are having fewer and fewer discretionary dollars to do what we can to inject the creativity that has made our country so successful. It's the creativity that's made us successful, not necessarily our test scores in science and math and whatever else. But our hallmark is our creativity as a nation, and that's getting stifled with the lack of opportunities in our rural areas and recently with our economy. So my interest is how do we fix something like that?
You had a wide range of stuff. First of all, do you want the federal government more involved with your education system?
I would like to have less mandates, and we would like to get the money and do what's in our best interest, what we feel as a local government and community. That's why we have elected officials. That's why we have people that listen to us and say, this is how we feel. We should spend money that's in the best interest of our community because we know more about our community and what's in our best interest than anybody outside of our area. But more and more, it becomes harder and harder to do that.
Yeah, and Paul and I go back, and you've been more supportive of me than probably anybody. You and Geraldine and anybody in the town. So I hope you don't lose your part of what I believe in. And again, I just want to tell it like it is, and you may not agree or not agree. I think the federal government needs to get out of the education business and leave it to the states and the counties. I don't think the people in the federal government should be dictating these federal mandates to you, which is one cause of some of these problems, nor dictating that we're going to determine how well you're doing in school based upon certain test scores, which I never did well on test scores. But I finished third in my class in law school, and I bet you, I don't know what percentage out of higher LSAT or most people now. Test scores aren't ridiculous. I don't think all these unfunded mandates, not only in education, other areas, should get out of the federal government. I don't think it's part of it. That doesn't solve your problem, get more funding, which you're going to need from the state and the counties. And the way to do that is not a simple solution, but the obvious solution is you have to find a way to diversify the economy and make the business smoother. The coal power plant that we discussed earlier when you got here, the people really wanted that. The people really should have that opportunity to have that. And that would diversify the economy by some of the taxpayer dollars from the locality to pay for the school district. I would be much more in favor of the local rule and state rule, taking those responsibilities and doing what they feel is right, and telling the federal government to get out of our business. I'm more of a states' rights person. I think most people in Nevada, that are independent people in Nevada, want the federal government out of these decisions. My mother's in education, she may not agree with me on that, but I would prefer to see that. And part of our proposal next week is going to be to decrease the Department of Education, keep some of these essential programs like Head Start and so forth, but get out of some of these other things. Maybe not solve your problems, but.
What about, I've seen the decline over the many, many years with the teachers' place and unions requiring. I know for a fact that my second grade niece, my sister went to talk to her at school, and this was in California, and she kept looking at her watch, and my sister said, "Excuse me, am I keeping you from things?" She said, "The union says I don't have to talk to you for 15 minutes. And I also see, when I came to White Pine County when we moved here, it was unbelievable to me to see the school system and the way it works, and Paul, you've done a fabulous job. And it just goes back to the fact this is a unique community, and it needs to run itself. And these mandates from the federal government and from unions, and you see Clark County School District, again, and you see this, that they just pour more and more and more money in there, and it's all for administration, and the schools have gotten no better. So what's the answer? What is the answer?
First, but again, I think it's going to be a state issue that the state legislature and the governor should make those answers as opposed to me. But I'm going to give you my philosophy on that.
Okay.
Because I'm again a big believer the federal government should do just those specific things that the federal government is supposed to do. But again, on an education basis, the more competition you can create in the education field, I believe the better problem you're going to have. And in Arizona, they were having the same type of felon school system, and they started moving more and more charter schools. Right? It just isn't going to work in a place like White Pine. You have one high school here, and how many middle schools?
There's one middle school.
One middle school, one high school. But in Clark County, the seventh largest in the whole world. If you allow more of these charter schools to come like they are in Arizona, started approving charter schools, and the charter schools have gotten better than public schools, because the competition has gotten better. Clark County, we have adamantly against any more charter schools.
Oh, sure, yeah. Competition's not good
for them, but it's good for the public. Sure. And I'm a big advocate of that.
But some of the savings that we might be able to incur on the state level, could be used in other school district areas like White Pine or like all of them.
White Pine needs its fair share. Sure. And I'm tired of so much going to Clark County.
On the school system.
I think if you talk to any government employee who does not hold an administrative job, they will all tell you, whatever their department, that their administration is top-heavy. You've got too many chiefs in most every government office. That would eliminate.
Clark County School District is the worst you've ever seen.
That's my point. But that's just
they
one
have like 8
in the whole
superintendents
state.
and 15 assistant superintendents.
What industry does well that has a monopoly? Can you think of one?
No, because creativity and entrepreneurship is just what you were talking about. This is what makes things work.
I'll tell you what the end result of this whole thing is. I work for the school district, but I work in a rather unique situation. I work down in one of the prisons, and I teach. And I would say, and I think I can probably get away with this without getting too much trouble, about 75% of my students, inmates, come from Clark County. So obviously things are not going well down there.
Well, you just look at the graduation.
And if they don't do it right, and this is why, if they don't do it right in the education area, then we're going to have to do it right in the prison situation. And it's just that's the way it works. And and I realize this is not your problem, per se, because it's a state problem. But every time they cut, and I've only been with the school system for 5 years, but I had a private school here for 10 years. And every time they cut, you know what gets cut up here? Don't have a choice. Paul doesn't have a choice in the board stuff. They cut teachers. And that's the wrong thing to do. I mean, you know, and maybe if somebody would whisper in the ear to those people down there, get rid of some of that top heaviness, who knows? You know, we might just have one of the best school systems in the country instead of the 50th.
Well, you know, it's a difficult thing, and I think in our case, I need to make a couple of corrections. We have one school, high school here in the community. We have a K-12 school facility in one.
Right.
But, you know, typically, you try to cut away from the classroom because the classroom instruction is the most important thing in terms of the child's education, and the student-teacher contact is the most important. I think most people realize that. However, if you have very little funds outside of the classroom to cut, there really is no other place to go other than the labor force. And with the labor force, you do the same thing, but they're bare essentials, core necessities and everything. You have to have so many custodians in order to keep building things. You have to have a principal in each school. You have to have, you try to strive for student class sizes. Somewhere, education has to be paid for. Somehow, there has to be money in education. And whether it's from the federal government or whether it's from local taxpayers and communities, where's the money going to come from? And in our instance, where you have relatively few numbers, there's not a lot of per capita revenue here. You know, $1 in Las Vegas per person is a lot of money. $1 here per person in White Pine County is $10,000. So, I mean, economic diversification, I think, is a key point for that. But if you have few contributors in an area, you need some assistance from outside the area. Just like we have to subsidize small schools within our own micro universe. That same thing has to exist in order for us to have truly competitive and equal education, you know, given our diverse area. You know, it's a challenge. I'm not asking you to answer it. But I'm saying, you know, that one of the solutions in our areas that I see is to try and find some business and economic development in areas so that there are more taxpayers. It's the whole diversification portfolio technique that you have. Would you rather have one contributor contributing $100 or 100 contributors contributing $1? If you lose one, you've lost $1 versus 100. You know, it's the same concept, the same theory. My interest are how do we do that? What's the incentive to get somebody to come out here and to relocate and to be a contributor in this community, bring their family in, because from that you get the volunteers that help Little League, that help the soccer league, that help coach athletics and those types of things. And when you're suffering the boom and bust cycles of a transient industry, it makes it very difficult because you're always tearing down and rebuilding. And you're tearing down and rebuilding. And you know, although we've been resilient, it's tough. It's tough.
The money that, and it's just not just White Pine County, but the money that the citizenry of the United States of America sends to the federal government so that they can disperse it where they want to. If that money wasn't going there in the first place, we would have a lot of our own.
Well, you know, and that would be a great point.
We change that.
Well, Bob, that's a great point because we get categorical funding, is what it's called. That is the funding they give us, but they tell us how to spend it.
Yeah.
You have Title I, you have Title IV, you have special education, you have all of these types of things, and they give a lot of money, the federal government provides a lot of money for education, which they do, which our state does too. A lot of times, legislators tell us, we want you to spend this money in the way we want you to spend it, which may not be in the best interest of how we want to spend
Well,
it.
in a nutshell, that's what's wrong with Washington.
Yeah, so
You can apply it to anything.
and that's one of the frustrations that we have. We're going to give you $1 million, but we want you to spend it on computers.
You have to, not
Well,
want you.
what if we just, a better example is, there's current legislation at the state and federal level for energy retrofits, renewable energy, and all those types of things, which I think is a great idea. However, our school district just went through and did a $3.5 million energy retrofit 3 years ago, before all of these incentives came out. Now, one thing is, we should be very proud that we did that on our own money without raising taxpayer dollars, but on the other hand, we're kind of kicking ourselves, because now all this money is available for us to do what we did 3.5 years ago, or 3
You
years
can't use
ago.
that money.
Now that money's not available for us to use in another matter for capital
And that's why
improvements.
the
to help
federal
our
government
citizens.
should be involved in it, because the sky knows what they need and where they need to spend it.
We have some of this stuff.
Yeah, well, it's frustrating, but like I said, that's,
Danny, one of the biggest challenges I see for you
yeah.
is finding the middle point between supporting Southern and Northern Nevada. And I think that's been a big issue with Mr. Reed, is he's lost sight of the fact that there's another world past Southern Nevada.
First of all, I hear that a lot, and there's no, that is such a non-issue to me, because I never thought of the Southern Nevada and Northern Nevada. In fact, when my dad won the national championship, one of the first things he said on TV was, this was great, in Nevada, because we never looked at it as a Southern Nevada.
I was there.
I can read it hasn't, I disagree a little bit with what you said with Reed there, in that it hasn't been that he's forgot the rest of the state and took care of Southern Nevada. Senator Reed's done what's best for him and his party. And maybe because he has more influence with the party and interest in Southern Nevada, he's doing it there. But,
Well, there's more votes down there.
He doesn't feel
Was
that
it
he's
for anywhere else in
And
the
there used
state?
to be,
What has he done for any other part of the state?
nothing.
you know, I see,
This
I'm not gonna get rid of them, so,
We're the ones that's bad mouthing, okay?
well, to answer that question, you know, it's so hard for me as a person to sit here and say anything other but the truth, that I've never looked at it as a South-North issue. But then when I ran for my last race, I did really well in my primary up north. But I ran against a Southern person in the primary. And I ran against a guy who lived up north in the general, and he was a Democrat, when I had no Republicans there, and I got killed. And everybody says because you didn't know anything. And I never thought of it that way. And
There
I've
are
never
an
looked at it
awful
that
lot
way.
of people who think, like she said, that there is no light beyond the Clark County line when you go north.
Well,
It's
it
not
used,
gonna happen with me, but I don't know how better to say it than just tell you that I've never looked at it that way. It wouldn't even have thought came into my thought process.
well, I remember in 1986 when Richard Bryan was governor, and he called us one day. He was so excited that the state of Nevada had just reached 1 million people. And it used to be that all the cow counties determined who was going to win, because Clark County wasn't that big. And now the demographics have changed, and not only have they changed, they've also brought in a lot of people from California and Oregon who have a whole different political philosophy. Used to, Nevada was a very conservative state. And both sides were very, considered very conservative, and that is not the case anymore. And, but
I was able to get computers from the Gates Foundation for 2 small colleges in Kentucky. And I'll see what I can do for this guy if he needs them. He does give a lot of them.
See, I think there is one area that you can hit when you get to Washington, if you will. The federal government has been well known for a multitude of years, and we've lived with it for so long, we don't even pay attention to it anymore. They say, here, we're going to give you $13 million, but the state's got to come up with another 4 or 5. And the state says, wait a minute, we haven't got that 4 or 5. Well, you're going to have to find it, because that's part of this program. If you can stop just that, we would help the state of Nevada.
That's what I think we're talking about with the federal mandates. I agree completely with that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, not only in schooling, I can name it in law enforcement, and corrections, and everything else.
Sure, but again, those are areas that the federal government should be involved in anyway. The federal government's expanded well beyond its intent and purpose. And we all know why. It's the federal legislators want more power. So
Socialist government.
Excuse me, ladies. But I see a movement around the country that is going away from that now. And our society's always going to equilibrium. At some point, there's kids on one side and kids on the other. I think we're moving back to because people are fed up with the way, with the power the federal government has and the intrusiveness that it is getting. And this last year just exacerbated more focus, people stepping up, and that's why a guy like myself, I'm not an elected official, and I'm leading the Senate Majority Leader in every single poll. It's not because of, it's because of this type of a movement and feeling that the federal government has got to go away from what Reed's agenda is.
But he has $23 million starting
He
to
spent-
count around.
That's great, well, you know, he raised already 15 million, and he has 8 million left in the bank. So he spent 7 already, and his numbers got worse. So,
He'll keep spending it, I'm sure.
there's no, it isn't helping. What he's gonna do, and this is Reed's, he said, oh, where'd my guy go, McConnell's, he was, this stuff I was gonna give Senator McConnell, I still plug. Senator McConnell had said to me when I went back to DC, he said, there's no way Reed can build himself up to win this election. His only chance to win is to tear down his opponent. So people go to the polls and say, I don't like this guy, I don't like this guy, but at least this guy's the majority leader. So you know that's what he's going to do. His staff has said so. Whoever runs against Reed, they will vaporize his opponent. See, I think that gives me a big advantage because I just won the defamation lawsuit. I'm sure there's going to be other things he's going to attack me on, or maybe he'll try to attack me with those same things. I'm not naive, though, to think that he won't. But I've already fought him on it and won that lawsuit, and I'm going to throw that back at it when it happens. But whoever's in that race against him, that's what it's going to be like. You say negatives don't work. If it doesn't, then Reed has no chance.
I just want you to stay. I'm Danny Tarkanian, I'm a family man, and I drive a van.
No, you need to put that one on the table.
And I have every confidence that Amy's not going to let you change once you get to Washington. She'll keep you straight.
You know,
I always tell him not to waste my time. See, don't waste my time.
the purpose of looking at something to change not as simple. You know, what motivates you? See, what I've tried to explain to my students is that I have utmost respect for a guy like Senator Laxo. I think he's a great public servant, and I think he did what he thought was best for the people of the state. Even more so, I have great respect for what my mother has done. And my mother, I'm a city council, you can't, my brother's best friend went in front of her to get his own changes, she wouldn't vote for it. She told him, you like family to me, but I wouldn't vote for my sons for this issue. She stands for her convictions. And I got such great respect for that. And that's what I want to accomplish when I'm older, that my kids think about me the way I think about my mother and Senator Laxalt. And if you have that, and you feel that, why would you go back to DC and get into a power struggle?
Well, if we don't change it, there won't be a country for your little children and my grandchildren.
Going back there has a tendency to change folks too.
Yeah, I understand it's not going to change it.
Well, and over and over, we see our representatives and senators go back to Washington. And then the next time they run, the donor profile is different because this is an incumbent. Now, it really turns into a bad situation at times when the big donors are getting more accomplished for their own, whatever project it may be, if it's a project or not. And I don't want you to explain to me how you're going to avoid getting into that, because you're not going to know the difference. To me, that seems to be one of the more difficult problems. That anybody who goes back to Washington, D.C., and especially as a senator, because it's more of an office gathering of people. And I think it tends to happen in the Senate more. Have you ever thought about how you're going to guard against that kind of thing?
Well, if I understand what you're saying correctly, is you have all the special interest groups that are throwing money at you, and then they're going to expect you to vote their way. And that is a big problem with our political system right now. But if I win this election without the special interest groups, and I do Senator Lee, why can't I win the next one if I can comment about what this is?
It's not a matter of ability, it's a matter of thinking you might win someone's favor and win a certain project. that seems to be the attitude
You need to
that follows
remember what
through.
your mother said.
Yes. It seems to follow through with going to Washington. It's like you get on the city council and all of a sudden somebody's put this hat of knowledge on your head and you're the smartest person in the county. Just ask them. Well, it's the same thing that happens in Washington. This is what Carolyn's been saying. People go to Washington and they've just been an ordinary Nevadan all their lives. They go to Washington, all of a sudden, oh, look at me, I'm great. I'm from Washington, I can do this and
And I
that
have
and
a
the other.
limousine and I
And
have
everybody's
47
saying that's
A's.
gonna happen.
I can go to all these parties and wear all these
Sure he wants his job in.
I want to ride your limo.
Famous.
I want to ride in the van.
I have to take my kids to practice. Yeah, good seeing you guys.
See you all.
Thanks.
So many of
Thank
them
you,
do
young
that, and
men,
it-
for
it's
coming.
just
You and your brother.
A mindset.
Well, that goes back to what I tell you, what I try to say, see, sometimes I get long winded with some of my stories, but there's a purpose to all my stories. When I mentioned to you, you know, my dad, who in my opinion is the greatest coach of all time, is certainly one of the best, to sit there and talk to the coaches from a very small program that ever won. Just because my dad didn't think he was smart enough, everybody else to learn from somebody else. Why do you think I'm gonna go back to DC and get the lessons I learned from my dad?
I'm not saying you are, I'm
We're not
saying
saying
it
we think
happens and it's a danger and it's always somebody out there to smear you in.
I certainly understand, and I understand the outside forces that will try to disrupt you. It's that way in powerful positions. All I can do is tell you, I really want to be a public servant and do what's right, and I'm not going to allow myself
That's
to
the
be.
problem, is that everybody goes to be a public servant. And they,
Most of
and they turn out this elite, you know, that they don't have to answer to the people. And I think that's what the people are really mad at. They want to be,
We have to leave, but I want to share one bad mouth before I leave. And I won't go into what the discussion was about, but I called Mr. Reed about something. And his response to me was, I'm always best. Don't ever do that to me, or you're gonna get another vote. Because you know what, I got as much education as Reed, probably more. And I know that and the people in this room, the people that were doing the what do you call them, tea parties and stuff like that, we're not a bunch of idiots, like we seem to be portrayed as. And we're not a bunch, we love America probably as much, if not more, than anybody. And that's the kind of thing that makes me mad about Mr. Reed.
a Washington
So,
elite, if
yes.
they know better.
Well, they don't everybody.
When I was in Texas
I know
one
it's
time,
better.
we lived in Texas for a while. And one day, this man come on the television, and he said, listen, just vote me in. I know what you need. I know what it is that will take care of you. I'm going to do it for you. Well, you know, that came from about 100 years before, when people didn't have education. You know, when people weren't following it. I watch quite a bit. By the way, I've been enjoying where I'm at. I work evenings. I'm one of those strange teachers that work in the evening because the guys are out. Well, I watch the Reno News.
I said, you're the Harry.
I've never seen so much wasted money in my life as those TV ads. But
Thank you
it's
for
good.
coming.
It's good.
Thank you very much for coming. My family and I are going to have to go too, because we have to be in Peel in a short period of time for our last stop of our trip. Thank you so much for being here, listening to me. If there's other questions you have, I think,
Where we email,
that's what I say, hopefully my email's on, but let me see. I don't even know what
The
that looks
info one. It's just Danny at Tark2010.
Yeah, the email, all of them are tar2010.org, but I think they have on their info. My personal one is Danny at tar2010.org. I don't even see where the email is on. That's not good.
Danny at
tar2010.org. Anyways, any questions you guys have, I'll try to get back to Sean. And, I'm going to give you my card, which has like this, my phone number on it, so I'm not email on it.
But you were thinking us would help you, thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Come back when you can.
Yeah. You know, I parked over by the birds and I said, oh, that's yeah.
Squirm a little bit.
Thank you. Well, you know what?
Yeah, that was not fun.
And
That
this
was
is
that big
now
truck.
primary.
Yes, that was scary, horrible.
I can't get enough of those snacks.
Well, that truck was gone by me about 2 minutes earlier. So I knew that. And it went by me. Yeah, 55, you know, I worked in the 60s, not really. Hey! You registered to vote?
Talk about it. Yeah, yeah.
Basketball games.
I was talking to him 6 times already. Did you? You got the name? Oh! And the little one.
That's like Jerry.